Good day and welcome to the first lesson in the topic Responding to the Environment in Humans. This topic will be divided up into 7 lessons. There's quite a bit of work in this topic, and if you look at the work schedule, they've allocated 4 weeks to complete this topic. Also, if we look at the kept document, we note that the topic of humans' response to the environment carries the most marks in paper 1 when compared to any of the other topics. So we're going to start off with the human nervous system, which is composed of the central nervous system, known as the CNS, the peripheral nervous system, known as the PNS, and the autonomic nervous system, known as the ANS. So there's 2 ways in which humans respond to the environment, namely the nervous system and the endocrine system. So in this topic, we're going to be focusing on the nervous system. The next topic will be on the endocrine system. But just so that we know that both of these 2 systems play the same role of responding to the environment in humans. There are some differences between them in that with the endocrine system, the response comes from glands, whereas in the nervous system, the response will come from the brain and the spinal cord, which is the central nervous system. In the endocrine system, the response is in the form of hormones, which are chemical messengers. In the nervous system, the response is in the form of electrical messages called impulses. In the endocrine system, the response is carried in the blood. These hormones travel in the blood until they reach the target organ, whereas in the nervous system, the response is carried via specialized cells known as neurons, which are found within nerves. In the endocrine system, the action can be short or long. So the action of that hormone can last even for days and weeks and months, whereas in the nervous system, the action is very, very rapid, happens within seconds. So why do we need a nervous system? Well, one is to react to stimuli. Stimuli is the plural of the word stimulus, which will end with US instead of an I. And a stimulus is a change in the environment. So we react to changes in the environment, whether it be the external environment or the internal environment. So if, for example, the outside temperature decreases, that would be a stimulus, which will be picked up by the body, sent to the nervous system, and it will send a response. Maybe a person needs to start shivering. That will be controlled by the nervous system. Or there can be an internal stimulus. Maybe some food has been detected inside of the stomach, and there's certain digestive enzymes that need to be secreted. And this can also be transmitted via the nervous system. The second function is for coordination of various activities in the body. To coordinate means to make sure that everything happens in the correct order, basically. Examples of responses. We can group responses in 2 different categories. Some responses are voluntary. It's within our control. For example, walking, or eating a sweet, writing or typing something, kicking a ball. All of these, a person wants to do it, they think about it, and then they do it. Same with coming to school. Although some of you maybe don't want to come to school, but in the end, it's a voluntary action. Involuntary actions are things which you don't think about, but they happen kind of automatically. This includes your heartbeat and your breathing rate, which you learned about in grade 11, that the medulla oblongata controls these 2 vital functions. Removing your hand from a hot object. If you touch something that is very hot without knowing, you immediately remove your hand without having to think about that action. That's what we call a reflex action which we will look at in more detail in one of these lessons. Digestion also. A person doesn't have to think that, okay, I had my breakfast, it's now in my small intestine, I need to move it from here to here or to my large intestine. It happens by itself. It's an involuntary action. Something like blinking, I'm putting it halfway in between voluntary and involuntary. If you want to blink your eyelids, it's within your control. But there's certain times where maybe an object is thrown towards you, you'll find that your eyes will blink involuntarily without thinking about it. That is a means of protecting your body. Okay, so the central nervous system, firstly, is made up of two organs, namely the brain and the spinal cord. And the name central nervous system, it describes the location that they are found centrally within our bodies. These are protected by what we call meninges, which is made up of three membranes, the pia mater, dura mater, and arachnoid. Right, so if you look at the examination guidelines, it says that you need to know that the nervous system is made up of the brain and spinal cord and that it's protected by meninges. It doesn't mention the other means of protection. That's why I've put these in a smaller font. But just for our information, it's also protected by the skeleton. Right, so we've got bone, the cranium bone, which we've learned about in grade 10, which will surround the brain and protect the brain, and the vertebrae, which protect the spinal cord. There's also a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. You can see the cerebral part has to do with the brain, and spinal has to do with spine. This fluid surrounds the brain and spinal cord, and it's a means of protection also. Your homework is to draw and lay a label diagram of a section of the brain. So not the outer structure, when the brain has been cut in half, right? And annotate with the functions. So you're going to have a drawing of the brain. You're going to label the following labels: the cerebrum, cerebellum, corpus callosum, medulla oblongata, and the spinal cord. And next to each of those labels, you're going to write down the functions. This is a very useful way of reiterating knowledge, or to make sure that you understand the concepts and the different structures and functions. It's a very crucial thing in life sciences that you understand structure and function. And one way in order to understand that better is by drawing the structure, making sure you know the label and the function. And you'll find that especially in paper 1, if you've got that for all of the different diagrams, it's easy for you to get at least 30 to 40% of the papers can come from just that information alone. Okay, so the nervous system, we break it up into different parts. Firstly, we've got the central nervous system, which is spoken about. It's the brain and the spinal cord. And then we've got what we call the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. And the peripheral nervous system is made up of 12 pairs of cranial nerves, which come out from the cranium, and 31 pairs of spinal nerves, which come out from the spinal cord. Now, the word peripheral means coming from the periphery. And if you look up the word periphery in the dictionary, it tells you that that's the outer limit or the edge of an object. So the peripheral nervous system are those nerves that will connect the outer part of your body to the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is further subdivided. It contains sensory neurons. Sensory neurons come from the sensory organs. Right? If you think of your senses for touch, taste, smell, sight, hearing, etc., you're going to get from your sense organs, the information will go on sensory neurons to the brain and spinal cord, which is the central nervous system. And within those sensory neurons, within those sense organs, there are what we call receptors. Receptors receive the stimulus and convert it to the impulse, which will be then carried on the sensory neuron. The motor neurons then will take the response from the central nervous system to the effector, which is the muscle or the gland that is going to do the response for your body. So there'll be certain stimuli They picked up by the sensory neurons, picked up by the receptor and carried by the sensory neuron in the form of impulses. They go to the central nervous system. From the central nervous system, the response will come from the brain and spinal cord, which will be carried on motor nerves until it goes to the effector so that you can respond. Now, motor neurons can also be broken up into the somatic nervous system. The somatic nervous system conducts impulses from the central nervous system to the voluntary muscle. So somatic nervous system deals with voluntary muscles. It can take impulses from the receptors to the central nervous system, and then those messages going to voluntary muscles, those that are in your control, like what we spoke about voluntary responses, those are controlled by the somatic nervous system. And then we've got the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, or ANS, it comes from the word automatic, basically. Automatic, it's involuntary. So these conduct impulses from the central nervous system to the involuntary muscles, which are your smooth muscles and the heart muscles, right, and certain glands. And the autonomic nervous system branches into two parts again, right? You've got the sympathetic division. Sympathetic division prepares your body for action. It's what we call fight or flight. When there's an emergency, it prepares your body for action now. And then we've got the parasympathetic, which is basically the opposite of the sympathetic, which enables the body to return back to normal after being in the sympathetic condition where it was in a fight or flight response. So here's another depiction of a similar diagram, but just so that we can have another view of it. You can see in purple, we've got two organs that are shown here in the body. We've got the brain and the spinal cord, and collectively we call this the central nervous system. You can see the position in the body, it's in the center. If you look here on the right hand side, that diagram shows a whole lot of nerves going to the outer parts of the body. Would you be able to say which nervous system that is? But it will be the peripheral nervous system because it goes to the outer parts. It takes messages to and from the outer parts of the body. The peripheral nervous system can be broken down into somatic nervous system, which communicates with sense organs and voluntary muscles, right? So it's got in it some sensory neurons. Sensory neurons, they take information from the sensory organs to the brain and spinal cord, and then the motor neurons, which will take the response away from the brain and spinal cord. Then this somatic nervous system we've indicated is voluntary. We've got the involuntary part, which is known as the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system, as we've mentioned, is made up of two parts, which is the sympathetic, which is for arousing and exciting, and the parasympathetic division, which is for calming. Right, so now we're going to look at this autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic division, in a bit more detail. When a person is in an emergency situation, the sympathetic nervous system takes over. So for example, if you hear some gunshots, what will happen to your body is that automatically it's involuntary. Remember, it's part of the autonomic nervous system. You're going to find that a person's pupils dilate, right? And everything has a function to it. So probably to get some more light into the eye for better vision, you're going to find that the pupil is this dark black part of the eye, right? It's actually an empty space. You'll get to that detail when you look at the eye towards the end of the section. It inhibits, it stops the flow of saliva. Why? You're in an emergency. You don't need saliva then. Anything to do with digestion, you don't need in an emergency. It accelerates the heartbeat. The heartbeat increases. This will increase the flow of oxygen and nutrients to the muscles and the vital organs of the body, and this will help a person to respond in such an emergency. It dilates the bronchi and increases the breathing rate, which is going to now mean that a person gets more oxygen into their blood. It inhibits peristalsis. Inhibit means it stops or slows down peristalsis and secretions of your digestive system. If you're in an emergency, someone has a gun and is shooting near to you, you're not worried about digesting your breakfast at that time. There's more important things that your body needs to focus on. Then it does the conversion of glycogen into glucose, right? And that's crucial because if you, the stored glycogen from your liver will be converted to glucose, and that glucose is, we know during respiration, is a source of energy, and that's going to help you in that emergency situation. You're going to see that all of these diagrams are organs, and then we're talking of the effect at the various organs. So on top of your kidneys, in grade 11 you've learned, you've got the adrenal gland, and the adrenal gland will secrete adrenaline, and adrenaline will also help in this fight or flight response, and it will inhibit the bladder contractions. You wouldn't worry about going to the toilet at that point. Okay, so we said that the sympathetic division deals with a fight or flight response. Okay, we now look at the parasympathetic division. And you're going to find that this is basically the opposite of the sympathetic division, right? So if the sympathetic dilated the pupils, here it's going to constrict the pupil. That pupil becomes smaller in diameter. We're going to find that it stimulates the flow of saliva, it slows the heartbeat, constricts the bronchi, stimulates peristalsis and secretions. Stimulate means to start off. And it stimulates the release of bile from the liver for the digestive processes and the contracting of the bladder, so a person can now go and urinate. You'll find that sometimes if your body is in an emergency situation, you won't even feel that you need to urinate. Sometimes if you're playing, for example, a game and you're very engrossed and you're now in the semi-final or in the final, or you're playing Fortnite and you're busy giving people headshots and you're killing a lot of people and people are trying to kill you in that game, your body goes into kind of a sympathetic mode and you're very focused now on that game, and you can play for however long you're playing. And then sometimes when you end off playing, you realize now that, hey, you've got an urgent need to go and urinate. But while you were playing, you didn't feel that. Sometimes that's because of the sympathetic nervous system taking over during that line of action. Right? So we can see in general, if we summarize it, the sympathetic nervous system is for fight or flight, right? It makes your body ready for action. Fight, either fight off someone, or flight, which means to run away from there, but you'll have enough oxygen and you'll have enough glucose for that action. We find that the parasympathetic nervous system is rest and digest. So feed, breathe, and rest and digest. It allows your body to calm down and to digest the food because you're not in any danger in that moment. So again, if we look at its sympathetic branch, we look at some of the functions of it. We've already mentioned these: increase heart rate, increase breathing rate, inhibits, stops or slow down the movement of the digestive system, stimulates conversion of glycogen to glucose, and dilates the pupil. Now, if you've learned the sympathetic branch, you don't need to go and SWAT the parasympathetic branch. If you understand what's happening, you'll know that the parasympathetic is exactly the opposite of the sympathetic. So if the sympathetic branch increased the heart rate, we'd know that the parasympathetic branch would therefore decrease the heart rate. If the sympathetic in a fight or flight emergency situation increases your breathing rate, the parasympathetic will decrease your breathing rate. While the sympathetic inhibits the movement of the digestive system, parasympathetic will stimulate and cause that movement to occur. In the sympathetic, we have the conversion of glycogen to glucose being stimulated. In the parasympathetic, it's inhibited. And in sympathetic, we said that the pupils dilate. In parasympathetic, it will constrict. Okay, so that brings us to an end of this first lesson. Remember, there was homework for you to do. That's drawing of the brain and having those labels and functions. In the next lesson, we'll look at the correct answers for the functions to those labels. Look forward to seeing you in that lesson.